All right, so as you all know, we've now done section 1 and we've done section 2 of the book. All right, we're slowing it down quite a bit now because, we will go over 12, 13, and 15 this week, but you're going to get, pretty close to 5 lab days then to work on this stuff. I will say you probably won't learn a whole heck of a lot in Chapter 12. Now, I've given you this before, and I've shown you this thing with this Hunlock thing that I've referenced before. The reason I'm showing it to you is this chapter that we're on right now is on numbers and strings and dates. And if you look on there, you'll notice there's numbers and there's strings and there's dates. All right? And what we'll go over on Wednesday are arrays. Now, it's kind of neat because the stuff that's in here for arrays is antiquated. And what I mean is it's pre-2015, 2016 when the newer stuff came out. So you're going to learn both ways. Why? Because they're both still used. All right? And I plan on having us write an application together, and we'll write it and then we'll rewrite it so you can see how some of this stuff has been streamlined, so to speak, over time. All right? Tomorrow we'll go over control structures, exceptions, and regular expressions. Well, the control structures we're not going to spend much time on because it's a while loop, it's a do while loop, and it's a for loop. It's an if statement, and it's a switch statement more than anything else. So we won't spend much time on that. We will talk about exceptions and exception handling. Really, when you think about it, there's 3 basic ways that you can handle exceptions, and I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit. The first is to do nothing and always assume that the person running the program has a clue as to what they're doing. As you'd probably guess, that's probably the worst way of doing it. The second way is kind of what we've been doing so far, that you let bad data in, but then you use if statements to handle it, or a while loop to handle it, or whatever. We've done stuff like that before. The way that you do this with exceptions is you never let bad data in to begin with. You use what's called a try-catch mentality to handle that. And we'll go over that, like I said, tomorrow. Then we'll talk about regular expressions. Now, the book goes through, I don't know how many pages it has on regular expressions, but the point is there are whole books on regular expressions. What regular expressions are is it's the ability for you to go look through anything. Could be a document, could be anything, for whatever you're looking through. And I've given the example before. Let's suppose, oh boy, this would be a great example, that in the Bible, all right, and I don't care which version of the New Testament, the Old Testament, doesn't matter. But somebody decided that, what we ought to do is we ought to make this gender neutral. So every time you used he or him, we want it to say they, as an example. You could go through with regular expressions and look and find every occurrence of that and then change it. That's the kind of thing that we'll look at tomorrow. Then, like I said, on Wednesday, we'll go over Chapter 15. And Chapter 15, as it says right there, is on arrays, sets, and maps, all right, which again has been changed a lot over the last few years. Thursday, the plan is for that to be lab all day, Friday, lab all day, and I believe next Monday and Tuesday are lab or something like that as well. Then we'll have a pre-test, and then we'll have a test on this, all right? Then the following week, we'll go over 14 and 16. 14, as it says, how to work with browser objects, cookies, and web storage. And 16, I'm actually going to get to have a whole period at least that I spend with you on object-oriented JavaScript. We may even take 2 periods to look at the way it used to be done and the way it's done right now. The advantage of doing that and showing you both ways is the way that it is progressed to, the way that you do it now is very similar to the way it's done in other programming languages. For you two gentlemen here, especially for Spring, you're going to find that there's a lot of similarities between the way it's done now and Java itself. All right? And like I said, then we'll spend the following week on that, etc. And then we've got this to go. You're going to have a lot of time at the end of the semester to be working on both the midterm that's not due till December 3rd, and finally your electronic portfolio. All right? Okay. So that said, let's just jump into Chapter 12. So as you can see, I'm on page 357. And they mentioned that earlier in the book, they went through some of these basic skills, and now they're just adding to them, so to speak. Now, some of the stuff that's used in here, you probably won't use very often. You might use on a very limited type of basis. Other stuff in here, you might use quite a bit. As always, it depends. All right. Then they've got the game of pig in here. I don't know if you've ever played that or know what it is, but you shake a die. And the idea is you don't want to get a 1. So let's say I shake it, I get 6, and I shake again and I get 7. Well, now I can go 13. All right. But if I shake a 1, I lose all the points I've just gained. And the idea is to see who gets to 50 first. In a way, it's kind of like playing the old war card game, but it's playing it with dice. All right, so they'll go through that. We'll look at that a little bit, but I don't know how much it pays to really look at that. All right. Then after that, when we're done with numbers, we'll look at strings. All right, and then we'll go into dates and times with that countdown app. The idea with that countdown app is that you can list any holiday you want and give it a date. So, for instance, if I wanted to say Halloween, it would say whatever it is, 6 or whatever days it is from now. If I said Christmas, it might say 60 days, that type of an idea. All right? And then finally, they talk about Internationalization Api, and that becomes more and more important as time goes on. All right? It used to be that everything was nationalized but not internationalized, and now it is. All right? So we'll talk about all that stuff. All right. So it says back in Chapter 2, we talked about numbers, all right? And they're going to mention here some of these properties. Notice right here that every single thing that they show in this chart that's here on page 359 starts with number dot, which means these are all part of the number class. All right? I'm not going to go through any of them. You can look at all of them, and hopefully at least they all make sense to you. All right? They do give you this test in here for infinity, NaN, etc. You know the NaN. All right? We've talked about this. The fact that other than 0 divided by 0, when you take anything else, you get infinity or negative infinity. That's not the way it is in most programming languages. If you don't believe me, next semester, when you three here start on the C# class, just write yourself a simple program and declare 3 variables. Let x equal 3, let y equal 0, let z equals x divided by y. And the program is going to break. All right, because you're going to get a divide by 0 exception. You don't get those in JavaScript. There are exceptions you can get in JavaScript, and we'll talk about those tomorrow. All right. So it says how to use the methods for the number object. Now, it says figure 12.2 starts with a table that summarizes several things of the number objects. The first 2 are instance methods, which means that you have to create something. You have to create an instance of it to be able to use them. If you say, I don't understand, well, then let's take a look at what's here. ToFixed, I think you all understand. At least that's my hope. You've got a number. We for example, we did the ToFixed when we used the miles per gallon program. All right, and we set it to a couple decimal places. BMI, we set it to a couple decimal places. Dollars and cents, you typically set to a couple decimal places. That kind of thing. The toString, in many ways, it's kind of the reverse. In that, what toString does is, and I don't care what that says right there. All right, basically it takes whatever number you've given it and it converts it into a string. All right, so for instance, this room, I've used this example before. This building is 751 Parr Road. That's how we all say it. But there really is no numeric value to the 751. It's part of the string. All right? Now, sometimes the way that JavaScript works, not sometimes, but the way that JavaScript does work is if you combine a string together with a number, it takes that number, it makes it a string. All right? So a lot of times you don't even have to worry about doing this, is what I'm telling you. JavaScript does allow you to work in different number bases. By default, it assumes you're using decimal, which is what we are using. All right, but you can use, for example, binary, which is base 2, which has just the value 0 and 1. All right, you can use octal, which is base 8. You can use hexadecimal, which is base 16. Why is that important? Well, back when I was your age, when the computer barfed, basically, and it blew up, you'd get what was called a screen dump. And it would be all this stuff that was listed literally, usually it was in like base 16. And we'd have to go in there and we'd have to take everything that was in there and convert it over to see what the hell was wrong with the program. All right, that's not very much the case anymore. All right, so here's some of the things that you can use. Again, I'm not going to read these. You can take a look at them. You will not have to memorize any of these. In fact, the chance that you will have to use these on your next test, most of these at least, are fairly remote. There are a couple that you probably will use, and we haven't gotten to those yet. All right. And again, they talk about is NaN. We've been working with that, I'm not going to say the entire semester, but I would say most of the semester. Now, here's the ones that you very well might end up using on your next test in one form or another. Maybe not math.py, but the other ones. The absolute value, I've given this example before. You know, if I say to Mason, if I say, how old are you? And he says, 23, how old are you? And I say, I'm 64. Well, there's 41 years between us, right? 64 minus 23. And it doesn't matter if you said 64 minus 23 or 23 minus 64. There's still 41 years. So when the sign is irrelevant, you can use ABS, the absolute value, which just throws the sign away. Means if it's negative, it just throws away the negative sign. Rounding should make sense. When you use rounding, you can round in a lot of different ways. You can round to a certain number of decimal places. You can round and not have a number in there where it'll round up or down. So if it's 0.5 or above, it'll round up. If it's less than 0.5, it'll round down, type of an idea. All right. Math.ceil, which is short for ceiling, and math.floor, they're opposites of one another. Ceiling always rounds up. So if you've got 3.2, it's going to round it up to 4. If you use ceiling, if you use floor, even if it's 3.9, it'll round it down to 3. All right. Why do those become important? You'll see how these are used a little bit later. For example, when you work with like random numbers, which we'll get to in just a little bit. All right. As it says, the math.trunc returns the integer value of x with no rounding. So if you just literally want to throw it away and you don't worry about the decimal place. The math.pow, okay, that's considered more almost the old way of doing it. I've mentioned this to you before, that if I want to say x equal, let's just say 12 cubed, I can say x equal math.pow, and I can say 12 3, or today I can also say x equal 12 asterisk asterisk 3. Most people use the second one because it's less typing. But if you want there to be no doubt, this is the way that's worked forever in this language. This is fairly new to the language, and this can be used in some programming languages, not in most. Now, some of the things that are in here, like math.min and math.max, are still used, and they're really nice because notice what it says, math.min or math.x. Now, they give an example there. There's nothing wrong with their example, except what you pass into math.min or math.max can be an array. So if I had an array of 50 scores, test scores, and I asked for math.max, boom, it would give me the highest score. Math.min, boom, it would give me the lowest score, type of an idea. All right? And again, there are examples of each one of these, maybe better than the explanation that I just gave you. I don't know. All right. So generating a random number. Now there's different ways of doing this. I did mention to you this the other day, that when you do math.random, it gives you a random number that's greater than or equal to 0, but always less than 1. All right, I always forget how to do this, and typically I don't have my book with me. So, I mean, for example, again, you've seen me do this umpteen times. If I go to W3 Schools and I type in JavaScript random number, all right, and it'll show it right there. All right, and they give you all sorts of examples. Notice here, it says returns a random number from 0 to 10, math.random times 11. Well, that's assuming that you want 0. All right, but if you don't want 0, this is typically what you do, than what's shown here. So there's a number between 1 and 10. Remember, it's always going to generate a random number greater than or equal to 0, but less than 1. This is going to handle the case where it generates a 0. All right? So it'll bump it up to 1. And here, yeah, it'll be times 10, but it'll be less than 10. Because remember, that's less than 1. All right? So that'll pump it up. So if I change that number there from 10 to 100, it would generate a random number between 1 and 100. All right? And again, if I didn't want, I could remove the 0 from there and then do the one that's up there to give me a number between 0 and 100. So if I wanted, let's say I was writing some kind of a test program where I wanted to look at people's tests, and they could be between 0 and 100. I could use that one up there and run it, put it into a loop and run it 500 times, for example. Something like that. All right. So as it says, and again, this is just one of the ways of doing this. As I mentioned, it's not exactly done the same way. You see this one a lot too. All right, because the example that they give here, they're going to be using max and min. And the advantage of that is, well, what if I don't want a number between 1 and, maybe sometimes I want it to be between 1 and 100, but your written tests are worth 10 points. So I want a number between 1 and 10. Maybe I give you assignments that are worth 50 points, etc. So you've got your choice when you've got something like a max and min that you're able to pass those values in. All right. As it says, they can be used for testing. They're often used in games and applications that provide animation. Well, you know that. All right, so if you're writing your own game and you want it to go to a random spot on the screen, that type of an idea. All right. As it says, there are many ways to use this. If you do an internet search, and I just showed you one example, there are a lot of them. All right, so this is that pig application. I already explained the rules to you. They're shown right here as well. I'm not going to read this to you. All right? But the idea behind this, when you take a look, well, you've got 2 players, right? You can start a new game at any time. This is going to keep track of where they are. It's Mary's turn, and notice that if you click roll, and let's just say that she had gotten 14 points, so she's 1 away from winning here. And she rolls again and she gets a 1. All 14 of those go away and her 35 stay. All right? You can start a new game at any time, etc. Not a lot of CSS in here. Most of the stuff that's in here, at least really all of it, should make sense to you. All right? Then they give you the HTML and the CSS, or the JavaScript rather. Even the HTML, it may look a little daunting, so to speak, but there really shouldn't be a lot in there that you don't understand. All right? Now, here's the JavaScript. The advantage of this, if you take a look at the JavaScript here on the bottom of 369, and I think it goes on, I thought they did the rest of it here, in 370, all right? This is kind of, at least, a breakaway from what we had done on the last chapter where we were worried all and doing a lot of work with event listeners, etc. This is less of that stuff. All right? So again, looking at this, everything that's in here should make sense. All right? They are using an arrow function here. It's funny, over the weekend I was watching this I was watching this set of videos, and the guy who was writing it said, you know, arrow functions are great. This is something I'm using for the second year people, but he said, I always screw them up, so I don't use them very often, which is a pretty good reason for not using them, to be honest with you. You know, but it's I've given this example before. I don't know if you've heard it from me or not, but it's like mushrooms. People seem to love them or hate them. And it's kind of the same way when you use things like arrow functions. Some people I know that say, you know, just give me the old-fashioned function. It's much easier to work with that. Other people say, no, I really like the arrow functions. It makes more sense to me. All right? You know, I'm not going to try to write a next test that says you got to use arrow functions. I don't see what that buys me and what that buys you. If you don't use arrow functions, but you're able to write sound logic, that's more important to me than you writing arrow functions and not really having any idea what the heck it's doing. All right, so they explain the stuff that's in here, and again, they give you some more code. Now, the thing to realize about the code that's in here too is a lot of it is very jQuery oriented, and we didn't spend a lot of time on jQuery. All right, so you may have a little trouble if you try to understand that. I guarantee you, when you take your test on this, there won't be a lick of jQuery on it. That wouldn't be fair to you, and I wouldn't want to have to write the key for it anyway, to be honest with you. All right. So that was pretty much numbers. And again, sorry if I sound like a broken record, but you go to numbers here, under this Hunlock reference that I gave you, there's a whole number reference. So if you're taking the test and something doesn't make sense or you forget how to do something, you know, go back to there. And if you don't like that, as always, go back to W3 Schools. The next thing that's here, once it comes back, is strings. And again, what you'll notice here is a fairly extensive listing of the different string methods. These are the major ones right here. I'm not saying these are going to be 100% of them. And again, very similar to if you go and look up JavaScript strings for W3 Schools. You'll get the same kind of stuff. All right. So some of the major properties and methods of the string object. Well, you should all know this, what length is. Now, the key thing here, notice it says it's a property. Next semester, you three at least, will be in the C# class, and we will talk about length in there. But when you use length, you'll say .length paren, which means that length in C#, rather than being a property, is a method. In some languages, it's a property, meaning you don't use the parentheses. It's just something that's given to you. In other languages, it's something that you have to call. You have to call the method to get that. But either way, the idea is it gives you the length. So here they've got JavaScript. And the length of that is what? It's 10. If you count it, that's what you should have there. Now, some of the stuff that's in here, not much, but some of the stuff we've already looked at. Such as, I've showed you the char at, where you can grab a specific character. Hopefully you remember that we did the char at when I showed you that was one way. You asked the user, do you want to run the program again, Y or N? But just in case they didn't type in a Y or an N, they typed in YES. We only wanted to grab the first character. Then we uppercased it. We could have just as well lowercased it. So hopefully at least you have no trouble understanding the meaning of char at, 2 lowercase and 2 uppercase. So let's look at the new ones. All right, the first one there is concat. Notice returns a new string that is the concatenation of this string with each of the strings specified in the parameter list. Well, there are many different ways that you can concatenate things. All right, I will tell you right now, most books, most people who teach this will probably tell you they hardly ever, if ever, use Concat. If they want to add two strings together, they usually say the first string plus the second string, or they use the template literals, which is considered, again, the cleaner way of doing it today. But there's nothing wrong with doing it this way, and they show you some examples. The other things that are in here, index of, substring, sub-str, and another substring, they all deal with looking through a string to see if it contains another string. All right? So for instance, again, if I said, now is the time for all good people to come to the aid of their party, that was a big thing when I learned typing, because it basically made you use just about all of the letters on the keyboard. But again, with our politically correct world today, it used to be, now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of their party. Now it's time for all good people. So if we wanted to search in there for men or whatever, anything that was male, and we wanted to make it gender neutral, these are different things that we could use. You'll notice that for most of them, all right, at least like the index of, notice, if not found, it returns -1. That's a very common way to handle this. If you are returning some kind of a numeric reference, remember, since we're computer people, we start at 0, but if something doesn't exist, -1 is typically going to be what's returned. All right, so with the index of, it says searches the string for the first occurrence of a string starting at the position specified or the beginning if the position is omitted. Why is that important? Because you don't have to start at the beginning if you don't want to. You can tell it where to start. All right? Then notice there's a sub-str. Returns the substring from the start position passed through the number of characters specified by the length parameter. All right, so in other words, you tell it where to start and where to go through, how many characters to go through. Then there's a substring, another one, returns from the start position to, but not including the end position. And you might say, well, why do you have so many of these? Because people have demanded it over time. And again, there are examples of each one of these here. You're going to learn much more by going through the examples and taking a look at them than you are from me spouting the stuff that's being shown in the book. All right. Then they give you some additional methods. All right. Starts with, ends with, that should make sense just looking at it. Includes, returns a Boolean. Notice these first three return Booleans. True or false, right? So returns a Boolean that indicates whether the string contains the specified string. All right, and there are different ways that you can do this. Hopefully you all understand when we look at trim start, trim end, and trim. What trim is it calls trim start, then it calls trim end. And I've mentioned this kind of thing to you before, that if I've got a string that's blank, blank, O, space, so let's say there's a space there, Hera, blank, 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 and I call trim start, that's going to get rid of these, trim end is going to get rid of these, trim is going to get rid of both of them, but it does not get rid of, once you're in the string, it does not get rid of any of the blanks. You can pad, all right? It pads with spaces by default, but you can pad with anything you want. Maybe you've gotten a check where you get a check for like $1.37, for example, and it's got asterisk, 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 asterisk 1.37 to make sure that they want to make sure that you don't go in there and try to change that value. There's also a repeat, as it says. What's nice about that is it used to be, if you wanted to get fancy, and let's just say that you wanted to put in 50 asterisks, you had to basically hit the asterisk key 50 times. All right, now you can use repeat and tell it it's the asterisk and the number of times you want it repeated, for example. And again, as always, there are examples of each one of these in here. All right? All right. So how to create an array from a string. That is called exploding. All right? In here, it's going to be called using the split method. So in other words, if I want to create an array and I just say, hi there, how are you, as an example. If I run the split method on it, it's going to create an array with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements. So that'll be elements 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And again, ideally at least, with all the work that we've done with this stuff, that should make some sense to you. All right? And they give, the examples they've given here are fairly contrived. All right? But they do a good job. Notice in here, if we were going to split it, you've got to have a character in here that you can split off of. The one I showed you was a blank space. Here they're splitting it off based on dashes. So you'd be able to grab everything before the first dash, and that would be the month. Everything before the second dash, and that would be the day. Everything after the second dash, that would be a year, for example. All right? And they give you, again, a bunch of different examples. Again, I don't want to read this to you, but you can take a quick look at it yourselves. Notice if the string doesn't include the separator, it just returns everything. So if I said to split by a comma and there were no commas, it'd be act like I never even called it then. All right. So next come dates and times. And again, I showed you this. The other thing that's in here, there's a JavaScript dates. All right. And again, you're going to find a heck of a lot of stuff in here that's very similar to the same stuff in W3 Schools. So if you like W3 Schools, go to that. Not a problem. All right. So how to work with dates and times. What happens in here, if you notice, it says in JavaScript, dates are represented by the number of milliseconds since midnight, January 1st, 1970. You may have heard, or you may never have heard of this. That's typically called the epoch, E-P-O-C-H time. And it's the Unix epoch time. It's also shown that way. All right, it says internally, dates are stored in Universal Time or Greenwich Mean Time, GMT. All right. I often watch on the weekend. I watch maybe an hour-long. They have different webinars that come out, and I always have got to check because they always put it in GMT to find out when it actually is. All right. So, it says the first figure summarizes how the date constructor works. It says you can see several techniques used to create a date object. So let's take a look. That's the easiest. If I ran that right now and then printed it out, it would give me today's date and it would give me the time. Normally, I believe too, when it gives you the time, it gives you the time all the way up to milliseconds. All right? So that's if you basically want the current date and time, but you can put your own in there. This can be a time in the future. This can be a date and or time in the future, a date and or time in the past. All right? And hopefully this makes sense. There is a certain amount of math you can do with this stuff. But typically when you're doing anything with dates, there's only two types of math that you care about. And that's addition and subtraction. Really doesn't make sense to have date division. Really doesn't make sense to have date multiplication. But again, if you work for a company where they've got, I remember I used to work for a company that would talk about net 60 and net 90, which meant that the day that they placed the order, payment was due 90 days after that. Not necessarily 3 months, so we're what, at 10/25? It wouldn't necessarily be 1/25. It would be 90 days. All right? So as it says, when you create a date object, it's grabbing it from your computer. And that actually can matter. All right? And that's why, do you have to do it that way? No. But that's the way it's done by default. All right? As it says, and it's kind of quirky, month start with 0. So January is month 0, December is month 11. It says these values, this allows these values to be used with arrays, and that's true. So quite often you'll see that somebody, before they print them out, will add 1 to them or whatever. So it looks a little bit better, so to speak. There is an instance of operator, so if you want to check whether or not a date is valid. All right? There's different methods of the date object, and some of those are shown here. The one that you'd probably use most often is the middle one on that chart. ToDate string. Because it takes something like this, like that, and it'll format it to something like this. There are all sorts of different ways and things that you can use in here. I know you've heard me talk about this before, and when you look in here, notice there's a bunch of getters. Again, those are called accessors. That will allow you to get the current hour, the current minute, the current second, the current millisecond, the current month, the current day, etc. You can also go, and there's setters, which are called mutators. All right, you'll notice that there is a get time. There is no set time. All right, and it's all based off of the system clock. And it's funny because when I type this now, this is usually what I do at the end of class to see if it's time to leave. And you'll notice it says my clock is 0.7 of 1 second behind. That's pretty darn accurate. All right, in fact, a lot of times it'll say that my clock is exact. All right, it's the clock on the computer here. As it says here, except for the get time, get and set methods use the time zone specified on the user's computer to work with local time. There are complementary get and sets that allows you to work with different types of time zones if you want to or need to do that. All right, and then they give you, again, some examples of working with dates. I'm not going to read this to you. All right? And, part of me is really been thinking, and the last few days, how the hell am I going to test people on this stuff? All right? Right now, what I'm looking at, and again, it may change, but what I'm thinking about is that there'd be 3 problems on your next test. One problem would involve strings and or numbers. One would involve dates and or strings, and one would involve arrays. And probably the first 2 would be worth 25 points each, and the array one would probably be worth 50, because that's really the one that's used the most. So again, they've got this countdown timer is in here. And again, the idea is you can enter the name of some event, the event date. So let's just say your birthday was February 3rd. So you could say my birthday and put in, 02-03-2022, click countdown, boom, and it would show you how many days there are till your birthday, that kind of an idea. All right, nothing that's actually really very complex. Again, you could build that form in a matter of moments. They show this to you. There's very little CSS in here. And then there's the JavaScript. So if we look at this, we're on page 387. Again, this says they're using jQuery for it. All right? But still, the stuff that's in here should make sense to you. Here, if the length of the name or the length of the date are 0, in other words, you put nothing in there. All right? Again, we'd use the 000, but you get the idea. Then they are breaking up the date by using the dash. Now, you could set it up so that the user could use hyphens or dashes, etc. There's a lot of ways you can do this. I may have mentioned this to you that at least in times past, and I think it still is, the actual universal selector for a date are usually periods. All right, so you could check for that as well. In some countries, instead of saying like we do here, month, day, year, some say day, month, year, which can get a little bit confusing. All right. And again, they give you all of the code. Is this something that you need to look at? No, not really. All right. All right, and the last thing that's discussed in the chapter, as it says, is the ECMA script. Remember, ECMA is the European Computer Manufacturer Association. They're the people who are in charge, so to speak, of JavaScript. The Internationalization Api specification. I probably mentioned this to you already, but in case I didn't, API is Application Program Interface. It's basically all the documentation on everything something can do, for lack of better words. All right? As it says, it's sometimes included in the list of features. However, it's a special, different thing. Well, the idea is it allows you to format things differently based on the way that numbers are formatted for different countries. And you can format numbers, and you can format dates. And you can format monetary type of things. All right, I know one of the things we've done in the past, we probably will again next semester in the Android class, is we write a currency converter. And I ask you to go out and find the 5 most used currencies, and then you can put in any amount, and you can either go from dollars to that or from that to dollars type of an idea. And again, they show you a couple examples of using number format. And notice they're putting the style on here and what the currency type is. And that's it. So again, couple things. Where did I put that? Let's see. No, I don't have it up. All right, let's see if I can find this quick. This is kind of old, but let's see where we are in here. So I was gone last week. Here we're Chapter 12 lab. So notice this stuff is due 11/5. When is that? That is not this Friday, but the following Friday. All right? And tomorrow, as it says, we'll go over Chapter 13. Wednesday, we'll go over Chapter 15. This lecture took around an hour, 45 minutes. Tomorrow's will probably be about the same. The one Wednesday will take longer. All right? And then notice Thursday, Friday, and next Monday are all labs. If you are behind, like I am with grading, but if you are behind, please try to catch up. All right? And I'm just taking for granted that whatever you have or have not turned in, for example, from the old book, I mean, I want you to be in the new book now. I don't want you where you're still working on stuff for the old book. All right? So again, Thursday will be lab the entire period. Friday will be lab the entire period. Monday will be lab the entire period. Plus, like I said, you'll get what? You're getting 3 hours today. You'll get 3 hours tomorrow. I don't know how much time you'll get on Wednesday, but that's 6. And then Thursday and Friday, that's 4 each, so that's 8, that's 14. And next Monday, that's 4 more. That's 18 hours, give or take, or between 17 and 18 that you've got to work on this stuff. So you should have plenty of time to finish that. All right? Next Tuesday, as it says, I'll give you some kind of a pretest. Also on that date, because again, I think that'll give you enough time, we will go over the written tests for chapters 12, 13, and 15. Then a week from Wednesday, which is 11/3, you'll have the test. All right, and then notice the rest of the week. Okay? These are the last 2 regular lectures that you're going to get in here. All right, so 11/4 and 11/5, those 2 days, that'll be it for the regular lectures. Now, I'm still going to lecture on this stuff on the end, but there'll be no homework, no labs, no nothing. That's just for completeness sake. All right, and then you'll notice the following week, and again, with these lectures, this one you'll have probably at least 2 hours worth of lab. That one I'm not sure of right now, but it'll be set up the same way. All right, and then notice that once we get here, now we're getting close at least. In fact, this is not going to work. Now that I look at this, you're off that day if you didn't know it. Rankin considers Veterans Day to be an all-school holiday. So that'll have to change, but that's fine. All right, if I have to push it down and then make the test on Monday or whatever, we'll do that. That's not a big thing. All right, but you'll notice then that after we get done with that, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 8 different periods. All right, and each one of those is a lab period. So that's approximately 30 hours. All right, that should give you plenty of time so when we get to here and that midterm is due, that I'm expecting these midterms to be good. All right, and then again, notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 more, 9 more. All right, and I'm hoping that on that Wednesday that's in here, that Wednesday, that when you come in, all right, that if you will give me, you'll say, yeah, my electronic portfolio is done. All right, now the way that I've always done this, and I'm just saying this because it's not that we're that close, but just so you know, the last day of class, which is 12/16, I ask that you come in here. I literally talk for about 15 to 30 minutes, and then I let you go. If you don't come, you're still marked absent. All right, but I typically do that. Now, let's just say Michael says, well, I mean, I'm just about finished with my portfolio, but I'm not going to stay and work on it. That's fine. I'm going to be here. But there's a whole bunch of paperwork that I have to do for the end of the semester. Plus, I usually don't do this, but I'm going to try this semester, to see if by the end of the semester I can have your syllabus for spring done. So you've got some kind of an idea. All right. All right. Questions on anything we went over today? Okay. There are homeworks that are associated with both, with the chapter we went over today. The one we'll go over tomorrow. The one we'll go over on Wednesday. Take a look at them. Something doesn't make sense, as always, just let me know. All right. Okay. So we'll pick it up tomorrow. Then, as mentioned, we will be going over chapter 13 tomorrow. All right.